Taoiseach, I'm just wondering if you listened to an interview on Red FM, a Cork station, with a woman called Sarah on Monday. In short, Sarah was a victim of rape, refused morning after contraception, and ended up having to go to Britain for a late abortion at great expense and trauma. Now, in the context of a debate about unrestricted access up to 12 weeks versus restrictions, I think it should be required listening for everybody in your cabinet and everybody in the Dáil, because it gets to the heart of the experience of a lot of women in this country in relation to contraception and abortion. Sarah's experience is particularly harrowing. She was violated by a so-called friend, dismissed by a guard when she went to report it, and disbelieved by a pharmacist. But her experience to search for emergency contraception is mirrored by multiple accounts of women for many years. It's been raised in PQs for years, including by myself back in 2015, how medically unnecessary it is, but also how it acts as a barrier to access. And now we've seen the consequences of that. Sarah said she was asked a series of invasive questions by a pharmacist who said she didn't believe her and did not give her access to that medication. Now, some are proposing, including the Tanaiste and others in this Dáil, that to give the same powers to doctors by introducing a rape ground for abortion legislation. The Dáil committee proved it won't work and it can't work for precisely the reasons that Sarah experienced. And would the Taoiseach agree that it's ignorant and irresponsible of the Taoiseach and others like him to ignore that committee's research and to try to pretend that it can work, that it just ignores the reality, in this case by a woman in his own native city? Now, Sarah's testimony on the radio is very brave, but there's a few things people should listen before we legislate down the road on this issue. She said, "I'm against forced pregnancy. I'm a living, breathing human being playing a role in society. A fetus is a potential human being. In other words, the person who's pregnant should trump other rights." She said, "We need to respect women to make these decisions, not to judge about good and bad abortions." And would the Taoiseach agree that this just underlines that access must be based on the person who's affected making the decision, not an arbitrator, a doctor, the state or whoever else? And if we don't legislate for up to 12 weeks on request, the abortion trail will continue, and women like Sarah will continue to be counselled by taxi drivers in London, telling them to lie on the back of the taxi. Is that what we want to continue? So, Taoiseach, I'm going to ask, are you going to lift the requirement for a consultation for emergency contraception and make it over-the-counter, stopping women having to endure this type of questioning? And finally, is the whole government going to unite to listen to the lessons of Sarah's story and unite behind the committee's recommendations for unrestricted access?
I didn't have an opportunity to hear that interview, Deputy, but I will make a point of doing so once I have time, and I certainly pay tribute and have a lot of respect for people who are willing to share their personal stories and their stories of adversity when it comes to sexual violence and crisis pregnancies. In relation to whether any medicine is available over the counter or not, that's not a decision for the government, nor should it be. That's a decision made by a body called the Health Products Regulatory Authority, and they decide whether or not a medicine should be available over the counter or not. And they do that on patient safety grounds, because there are some medicines that, if used inappropriately or if taken by a patient who has other illnesses or perhaps allergies, for example, can cause enormous harm. So if something is not available over the counter and is a prescription-only medicine, it is thus for good scientific and medical reasons, and I wouldn't like it to be the case that politicians or people in this House were to take that power away from medical experts into our own hands under any circumstances, so we won't be doing that. In relation to the work of the All-Party Oireachtas Committee, as I said the other day, that committee didn't pluck its proposals out of thin air. The Oireachtas Committee considered the evidence very, very carefully and came to the conclusions that they did. And those conclusions, certainly to me, and I think most members in this House, make a lot of sense. That we risk re-victimising women if in some way we ask them to prove to their doctor or anyone else that they were a victim of sexual violence, and certainly I would not like that to be our law. I think it's important, though, that we recognise that Article 43.3, the 8th Amendment, is a feature of our Constitution, and it will not be possible for this House to legislate for lawful termination of pregnancies in any circumstance if that article in our Constitution remains in place. So there is a two-step process here. The first involves the referendum passing, which unties the hands of this Oireachtas to change the law, and then the second step is this Oireachtas changing the law, as it should, based on the evidence and based on public opinion and what the public wants us to do. But fundamentally for me, what this means is not trusting politicians. It means trusting women and their doctors, trusting women in the first 12 weeks of their pregnancy to decide what is best for them, whether or not they want to continue that pregnancy, and beyond 12 weeks, trusting doctors to allow it on medical grounds.
1 minute, Deputy Coppinger.
Taoiseach, I welcome the fact that you will listen to the interview, but you might bring the Tanaiste to sit and listen to it with you. The first issue is that she wasn't asked, Sarah wasn't asked had she had allergies. She was asked about her sex life. That's the reality of it. The morning after pill is safer than paracetamol or Nurofen. You can go to the counter, you can just get it without any questioning. Somebody can advise you as to its safety. This is different. Women are actually being interrogated. Can you imagine in a small town and village? This was actually in a major retail chain in Dublin. And also, Taoiseach, it adds to the cost, because once you have a consultation, the price of the medication goes up. Again, another barrier to access for poorer, vulnerable younger women. The Boots in Cork city centre, it's €60. Lower Kilmacud Road, Stillorgan, it's $15.50. You know, these are the variations. Women are actually looking up maps on the internet to see where they can get the morning after pill. You know, this is ludicrous in this day and age. And Taoiseach, on the substantive issue of abortion, yes, Count Corley, it will be up to the public to decide to repeal the 8th Amendment, but only this Dáil can legislate for abortion. And I hope it listens to the public and what the public is saying, because the public are ahead of the politicians.
Taoiseach, 1 minute.
I think, Deputy, if she hasn't already, what Sarah should do is make a complaint, and make a complaint to the Pharmaceutical Society of Ireland, which is a professional body which regulates pharmacists. And if there was any inappropriate or invasive questioning, they'll be able to take that further. It is, however, relatively standard practice that when somebody requests emergency contraception, that you do try to give them advice on contraception more broadly. So, for example, it may be the right choice for an individual at a particular point in time, but it may also be advisable that they go on more regular contraception. And sometimes pharmacists and doctors will offer them advice in that area. But certainly it should not be invasive or an interrogation in any way. It should always be respectful and information-seeking. And if the woman that you mentioned feels that she was treated badly by a pharmacist or by a doctor, I'd encourage her to make a complaint.
We now move to the Rural Independent Group.